My parents read to me when I was little, so my first experience with reading was in listening to the tales of Mother Goose, Grimm's Fairy Tales, the standard fare for children in the 50s. I especially enjoyed stories like The House That Jack Built and The Old Woman and Her Pig, stories that built sequentially and contained ironic logic. In first grade, though, when I was asked to read simple books myself, I found that I processed each word so slowly that I couldn't make sense of the sentence once I finished it. I was frustrated that it didn't come easily. My mother was a librarian of the old school, and she disapproved of some of the books coming out for kids. Nonetheless, it was Green Eggs and Ham that really got me reading. I read that book so much that I could and did recite it by heart, over and over and over again. On April Fool's Day, my father made a breakfast of green eggs and ham. My third grade teacher, Mrs. Horan, deeply disapproved of children reading aloud, even under their breath, when she asked us to read silently. She was adamant that kids should not move their lips while reading. She was very adamant. My choice of books, which I read silently without even moving my lips, centered on the Hardy Boys, which I bought for $1 a piece. Buying them, reading them, owning them became a passion. One day I stayed home sick from school, and my mother brought me a book from her library. It was a science fiction book called Raiders from the Rings. That began a stretch of years when I read little other than science fiction. Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert Heinlein were my favorites. But someone made me aware of the idea that science fiction was not good literature, not important reading. So I thought I should try to read a very important book that I heard some adults talk about with reverence. I borrowed it from the library at May Memorial Unitarian Church in Syracuse. I was 11 years old, and I think it's fair to say that the look the librarian gave me was skeptical, but he let me borrow it. I looked through Ulysses that week, but didn't get too much out of it. Maybe if I had tried to read it aloud. But thanks to my third grade teacher, I thought that kind of reading was only for babies or slow learners. In 8th grade, I had an English teacher named Mr. Filiamini. He encouraged us to read aloud. We took parts and read Macbeth. Reading plays aloud gave me a wonderful and grandiose feeling. I got to read the part of Cyrano de Bergerac, which I felt somehow was telling my story. But alas, just as I was beginning to enjoy reading for its expression and sonorities, in came a new fad, speed reading. Everyone still revered our late president, and we all knew he could read a large book in one sitting, comprehending just as much or more than us slowpoke readers. My teacher said it was the best way to read, so I tried very hard to master it. I did read very, very fast in Miss Wentworth's class, but what I'd read was just a blur. And some natural impediment in my brain kept trying to slow me down or trip me up. So I said to myself, slow down. At the risk of not being as smart as I could be or thought I was, I had to go back to taking my time. I read Ulysses, every word of it, when I was a senior in high school. I read slowly, but I still didn't read aloud, so I didn't get much out of it. I didn't know that Joyce was a writer who demanded dialogue with the reader. A writer whose prose was so dense and scholarly that it demanded slow reading, reading aloud, for me at least, a kind of translation, which I finally undertook as a senior in college. And Joyce's rebellion against staid boundaries and the strict limits of literature brought out in me a stubborn determination to read in my own way. It was an uphill struggle because Joyce not only uses arcane vocabulary drawn from many languages and vernaculars, but Ulysses is full of myth. You'd better be up on your Homer. At the same time, I was reading a lot of chess books and playing in tournaments during college, so I was used to translating dense text, reading really slowly, talking to myself, and making tactile, spatial, strategic sense out of symbols. The skill I took from studying chess allowed me to persevere through Ulysses to Molly Bloom's breathy affirmation, "Yes, I said yes, I will, yes." And I knew I had accomplished something. Ulysses and my friend Bob Sherwood, who said I'd wasted college by not studying ancient Greek, led me to study that language. I took a Russian steamer to Europe, traveled to a remote Greek island, rented a small house, and studied Greek 10 to 12 hours a day. I got to the point where I could translate very slowly and aloud the early dialogues of Plato. Otimen humes o Andres Athenaioi, papontheta hypotonomon katagoron oida. When I was exhausted from working on ancient Greek, I learned Middle English. By reading Chaucer's Canterbury Tales aloud to myself, memorizing the first 50 lines of the prologue. Juan dat April with the sure sorte, the druch the marchet persa da the rota, and bathed every vein and switch liquor of which virtue engendered is the poor. One zephyrisec with the sweat of breath in spirit hath, and every heart and heart the tender cropus, and the young sun hath in the ram is Alpha Chaucer's wonderful Middle English made me want to go even further back, before the Norman conquest injected French into English. So I studied Old English, slowly and aloud. I did an independent reading project with John Filer of Tufts University. Here is a sample of my Old English journal, where I was working through Beowulf. Swar ik soda, und with richte wan, Anna with ealum, och that idel stod husa selest. In studying Old English, I came across a fragment much less well known than Beowulf, a story about the Danish invasion in East Anglia in the late 10th century at a place called Malden. The story revolves around a rash hero named Björnthnaut, who allows the Vikings to cross a ford at low tide so the English and Danes can fight a fair fight. Brokenworde, het the husa hwana, horse forlaten, feara fussen and forthgangen, hugen to handum and to hia godum. Tha that often may erist onfunde, that say erl nolde hierthe yetholian, let him tha off handum, lay off na fleogan, havoc with us hordes, and to their hilde stop. I worked on a translation for months, and have recorded the Old English and my translation on CD. Had been broken. He commanded each one to let loose his horse, drive it off far, then go forth reflecting on how his hands could create courage. When off his kin first discovered that Björnthnaut wished them not to suffer cowardice, he freed him, his dear one, to fly off his hands, his hawk to the woods, and then he stepped into battle. My wife Karen and I read Moby Dick aloud to each other when she was pregnant with our oldest child, Justin.
Captain Peleg, said I have a friend with me who wants to ship too. Shall I bring him down tomorrow? To be sure, said Peleg. Fetch him along and we'll look at him. What lay does he want? Groaned Bildad, glancing up from the book in which he had again been burying himself. Oh, never thee mind about that, Bildad, said Pegleg. Has he ever whaled at any, turning to me? Killed more whales than I can count, Captain Pegleg. Well, bring him along, then.
We read Mildred Taylor's Roll of Thunder and its 2 sequels aloud to Justin, Matt, and Hannah. Shoot, the way old Thelma talked, said Sunboy of his older sister. Y'all be lucky to get away from here 'fore nightfall. I tell you, Stacy, women, sighed little Willie. Talking about a minute, and here it been a good half hour already. Ain't that the way, Stacy said, like he knew what the way was. Aw, man, you don't know nothing yet. Just wait till Cassidy get older. Now, just how my name get into this? I demanded from the porch rail. I'm just sitting here minding my own business. Ain't done nothing. Little Willie slid a sly glance my way. But you will. And just last summer, as Karen and I traveled around Nova Scotia with our youngest child, Grace, she read us The Deathly Hallows from the back seat of the car.
And what would you say, Royal, to those listeners who reply that in these dangerous times it should be wizards first? Asked Lee. I'd say that it's one short step from wizards first to purebloods first and then to Death Eaters, replied Kingsley.
Yes, reading aloud has become my greatest, deepest pleasure. Listening to the sound of words and letting the profundity of great literature sink into my soul.